Imagine hiding in your own bedroom, desperately holding your breath in the dark. Because if your kids down the hall hear you, the entire illusion of your perfectly stable, predictable suburban life will just shatter into a million pieces.
Right. It's terrifying.
It is. And that is the exact and honestly, the exact thrill that's driving our conversation today. So if you have ever built a life that looks, you know, absolutely flawless on paper, but feels entirely suffocating in your chest, this deep dive is specifically for you.
Yeah, it's a really profound tension. I mean, we spend so much of our adult lives engineering stability.
Mm.
We want the solid house, the secure job, the predictable weekend
The
routine.
spreadsheet life, basically.
Exactly, the spreadsheet life.
Yeah.
But what happens when the wild, untamed parts of your psyche, the parts you thought you locked away when you became a quote-unquote responsible adult, start whispering to the air vents?
Oh, man. That is such a creepy but accurate image. And that murky, vibrating, deeply uncomfortable psychological landscape is exactly where we're walking today. We're taking a magnifying glass to this fascinating 2020 Sinhala poetry collection.
Right.
It's called Through and Through, A Lustful Silhouette. Or in Sinhala, it's Nura Pirunus Siluvata, written by Nirasha Gunasekera.
And before we get into the poetry itself, we really have to talk about who is holding the pen.
Yeah.
Because the author's identity is, well, it's the pressure cooker for this entire collection.
Yeah, give us the background there.
So Nirasha Gunasekera is a male, Sri Lankan-born computer engineer, and he's currently living as a diaspora immigrant in Melbourne, Australia.
Think about that combination for a second. An engineer, I mean, that's a profession defined by logic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Quantifiable metrics, finding the singular correct answer.
Very structured.
Super structured. And here he is trying to navigate the messy, completely unquantifiable reality of being an immigrant, a husband, and a father. The preface of this book really hints at this agonizing creative tension.
It does. He talks about a 3-year gap of silence, where he just couldn't write at all.
Right. 3 years of nothing. And then came the COVID-19 lockdowns in Melbourne, which, if you remember, were some of the longest and most brutal in the world.
That lockdown context is absolutely vital. I mean, he was physically trapped inside the very domestic life he had engineered for his family.
Literally locked in the house he built.
Exactly. And in that preface, he signals an immense, almost guilt-ridden authorship anxiety. He treats the act of writing these poems almost like a confession of infidelity.
Wow, yeah.
Like, he feels that putting pen to paper to express these raw, primal desires is a betrayal of his duties as a good father and a steady provider. Yet, not writing them felt like a betrayal of his own soul.
So today we are zooming in on just the middle of this book. We're looking really closely at 15 specific poems, poems 16 through 30.
The middle movement.
Right, because this is the exact point in the collection where his carefully constructed life begins to completely unravel. And we aren't just going to read these and say, oh, wow, that's pretty.
No, definitely not.
We're going to dissect the actual mechanics of his writing. We want to know, when the emotional pressure gets this incredibly high, does his poetic skill fall apart into messy impulse, or does it sharpen into something brilliantly controlled?
And we really need to track how the imagery evolves here. Like, are the spaces he describes intentional or just vague? Does his exploration of desire actually gain complexity, or does he just fall back on familiar cliches when he gets scared of his own vulnerability?
Let's start right at the threshold of this unraveling, like literally a threshold. Poem 16, which is titled Such a Day, opens with this incredibly fragile, delicate scene.
It's very quiet.
Super quiet. The speaker is inside a house, and there's a bamboo wind chime. He is asking a visitor, and we never actually told who this visitor is, to just pause. He wants this person to let their blurry shadow fall across the glass door before they actually step inside.
If we look closely at the craft here, the word economy is incredibly tight. It's sparse. And that glass door is functioning as a crucial membrane.
A membrane, right.
Yeah, think about how we experience the world, how our bodies and minds physically encounter our environments. That door separates the harsh external reality of the world from the highly sensitive internal sanctuary of the speaker's mind.
It kind of reminds me of being in a completely pitch black room for hours and someone reaches for the light switch. You instinctively flinch, right?
You brace yourself.
Yeah, you hold up a hand and say, wait, just give me a second. Let my eyes adjust.
Yeah.
That is what he's doing emotionally. He is begging for the physical time and space to acclimate to reality before it breaches his walls.
The pacing of the language mimics that exact hesitation. But, it raises a serious question about his poetic control.
Oh, how so?
Well, the visitor remains completely unnamed and blurry. Is that a productive, conscious choice to leave an interpretive gap allowing you, the reader, to project your own anxieties onto that shadow? Or is it just vague writing because he doesn't actually know how to define what he's waiting for?
Oh, I see what you mean. But I think it's a brilliant, highly conscious choice. By keeping the visitor blurry, the focus isn't on who is coming. The focus is entirely on the speaker's own internal state of anticipation.
The waiting is the point.
Exactly. The tension itself is the subject of the poem. And honestly, a bamboo wind chime is such a perfect, haunting detail. I mean, bamboo is hollow. It literally requires an invisible force, the wind, to make the sound.
Right.
He is sitting in his house completely hollowed out, waiting for an invisible force to arrive.
That shows immense structural discipline. He is controlling our entry into this section of the book. He makes us wait on the porch, listening to the hollow clack of the bamboo, forcing us to slow our own heart rates down before he turns the knob.
But then, and this is where you get absolute tonal whiplash, he doesn't just turn the knob, he rips the door off its hinges.
He really does.
You go from the delicate, quiet anticipation of the glass door straight into the raw, suffocating heat of poem 17, which is titled, She is 39, Daughter is 19.
The shift in emotional intensity there is just staggering.
It is entirely visceral. He paints this incredibly humid, overwhelming picture of a 39-year-old mother of three who possesses this profound, almost terrifying capacity for pleasure.
Right.
And he sharply contrasts her with a crying 19-year-old girl, really emphasizing the sheer power of mature female agency. The imagery gets incredibly intimate, bathing together, the physical weight of water scrubbing backs.
It's very embodied.
Extremely. And the male speaker. He doesn't conquer her. He describes himself as feeling like a helpless culprit in the face of her untamed, mare-like sexuality.
This poem completely subverts the way we are used to reading male desire.
Yeah.
Usually in poetry or film, the male perspective objectifies the woman. It controls her. The man is the active conqueror and the woman is the passive landscape.
The typical male gaze.
Exactly, but Gunasekera flips that completely.
Yeah.
The male ego is entirely dismantled here. He is physically, emotionally, and psychically outmatched.
Okay, but I want to stop you there and push back on the actual words he uses. Let's talk about the craft for a second. He calls her sexuality untamed. He compares her to a mare. Have you ever noticed how, when men write about powerful women, they almost always resort to comparing them to wild animals?
That's a fair point.
Doesn't that erotic language fall into a really tired, repetitive trope? Like, does the desire actually gain any nuance here, or is he just leaning on a cliche because he doesn't know how else to describe a woman who intimidates him?
That is a very sharp critique, and the danger of translating raw sexual terror into text is that you often just grab the nearest available metaphor. But I would argue that the use of the cliche is exactly what reveals the speaker's psychological state.
How does a cliche reveal his state?
Because the poem is essentially a documentation of male inadequacy disguised as erotic adoration.
Wait, explain how inadequacy becomes adoration.
Think about it from the perspective of an engineer who is used to controlling everything. Suddenly, he's confronted with a force of nature in his own bed that he cannot measure, cannot satisfy on his own terms, and cannot control.
Right, it terrifies him.
It absolutely terrifies him. So as a defense mechanism, he has to mythologize her. If she is just a regular woman and he can't keep up, well, he is a failure. But if she is an untamed mare, a wild beast of nature, well, no mortal man can tame a wild beast, right? It excuses his helplessness.
Oh, wow. That is fascinating. So it's not actually a celebration of her wildness. It's an alibi for his weakness?
Exactly.
It's not that I'm insufficient. It's that she is supernatural. That level of male vulnerability is so rarely captured without some kind of heroic filter. And you really feel how exhausting that intensity is, which honestly makes the transition to the next poem so necessary.
Poem 18, the one who brings flowers.
Yeah. After the heavy, humid, primal terror of the night before, the sun finally comes up. It's a sleepy, slow Sunday morning. A girl in a simple floral dress is bringing flowers.
It's so bright.
Very bright. They exchange a basic, polite good morning, and the speaker says that simple greeting feels like ambrosia. It's just a drop of pure, sweet relief.
This is where we see his structural intelligence as an author. He knows exactly how much tension the reader and the speaker can actually handle.
Right. He paces it.
Yeah, if Poem 17 was a room where all the oxygen was being sucked out, Poem 18 is someone finally cracking a window to let a cool breeze in.
It's a palate cleanser. But it also makes you realize something deeply melancholy. Have you ever had a moment of just pure, simple joy, like drinking a perfect cup of coffee on a quiet morning, And even while you're enjoying it, you feel sad because you know it's going to end in about 5 minutes.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what this poem does. The dark passion of the night was overwhelming, but the light joy of the morning is so agonizingly brief.
They are both completely ephemeral states. Neither the wild lover nor the peaceful morning can be sustained. And that realization of impermanence introduces a much heavier theme. We move from the fleeting nature of joy right to the crushing, undeniable weight of mortality and the past.
So true. Let's dive into movement 2, starting with poem 19, Where Did It Go Wrong? If you want a masterclass in how to write about grief without ever actually using the word sad, this is it.
Walk us through the imagery there.
Okay, we see a small group of men. They aren't wailing. They aren't breaking down. They are engaged in these incredibly rigid, specific physical actions.
Right.
They are wiping ash off their clothes. They are patting down their hair, adjusting their collars, actively trying to force themselves to look presentable. And they're looking at each other, quietly asking, where did it go wrong? The kicker at the very end of the poem is the realization that out of their original group, there are only 5 of them left.
There's a concept in cultural and literary studies, often grouped under the umbrella of affect theory, that looks at how emotions hit the body before the brain even has time to turn them into language.
Oh, like a physical reaction first.
Exactly. You don't immediately formulate a complex sentence about grief. Your stomach drops, your jaw clenches, your hands shake. Gunasekera captures that physical bypass perfectly.
It's like when someone gets devastating news and instead of crying, they just start obsessively scrubbing a stain on the kitchen counter. You know the counter isn't the point.
Right, the counter is just the physical outlet. The emotion is entirely conveyed through physical stoicism. By showing us the ash and the dwindling number of men, we can deduce this is a funeral or a cremation. But the discipline of the poet is what makes it devastating. He refuses to write, "We mourned our dead friend."
He doesn't hold your hand. Instead, it's a beautifully muted film. The tragedy is only visible in the tension of the actor's jaws. We only have 5 guys left. Let me straighten my shirt.
It's that male vulnerability again.
Yes. But this time, it's not expressed through sexual inadequacy. It's expressed through an absolute refusal to fall apart in public. They are trying to physically brush off death, just like they're brushing off the ash.
And that attempt to control the uncontrollable, to wipe away the ash of the past, fails completely in the very next poem. Poem 20, The Gate is Open, explores what happens when the past refuses to stay buried.
This poem is an absolute gut punch if you have ever lived far away from the place you grew up. The speaker is taking a quiet walk. We can assume he's in his current environment in Australia. It's peaceful. But suddenly, a train whistle cuts through the air.
Such a specific sound.
It is, and he describes the sound of that whistle hitting his chest like an arrow.
The train whistle is one of the most classic, powerful auditory triggers for anyone who has been displaced. I mean, it is the literal sound of transit, of leaving, of distance.
That one sound instantly collapses the thousands of miles between Melbourne and Sri Lanka. He is flooded with highly specific sensory memories. He remembers sitting face to face with someone. He remembers the incredibly distinct earthy smell of crushed wildflowers after a heavy tropical rain.
But it's not a happy memory.
No, it doesn't bring comfort. It brings this agonizing realization that he is a complete stranger to his own past now because, as he says, he has lost the key to the garden gate.
This is a profound articulation of the diaspora experience. When you immigrate, your identity fractures. The environment of your host country might be physically safe, but it is loaded with sensory landmines.
Sensory landmines, I like that.
Yeah, a smell or a sound can trigger a violent intrusion of the home you left behind. But the tragedy is the lost key. The gate might technically be open, the memories are vivid, but his access to that former version of himself is permanently revoked. He cannot go back to being the person who smelled those flowers.
We really have to evaluate his craft here, specifically how he evolves his metaphors. Because he brought up flowers back in poem 18, right? The girl in the floral dress bringing simple joy. But look at what the flowers are doing now.
Yes, the evolution is striking. In poem 18, the flowers were present tense, light, and floating. In poem 20, the flowers are crushed, and they only exist in memory.
I think the crushing of the flowers is the most brilliant part. It perfectly mirrors the crushing weight of the memory hitting his chest like an arrow. He takes the physical environment of his lost homeland, the heavy rain, the flora, and uses it to articulate his internal emotional environment in Australia.
It's highly controlled.
Very. He isn't just throwing pretty words at the page. The imagery is doing heavy lifting.
And that heavy lifting carries us into a really dangerous psychological space in Movement 3. When you realize you can't go back to the past and your present feels like a stoic, ash-covered waiting room, what happens to your desires?
Oh, they turn toxic.
Which brings us to poems 21 and 22. And poem 21, Burning in Desire, is, honestly, it's a trip. It is vivid, hallucinatory, and deeply unsettling.
Set the scene for us.
Okay, picture this. You are standing in a very deep, incredibly dark forest. There are heavy shadows everywhere. And right in the middle of this gloom, standing completely solitary, is a magical, deeply poisonous mushroom.
And it has a crown of dark earth on top of it. The speaker stands there looking at this lethal thing, and he is suddenly overcome by this mad, intoxicating, totally irrational urge to just lean down and kiss it.
Now, if we were to apply a strict psychoanalytic framework to this, looking at it through the lens of early theorists who studied human desire and the subconscious, this poem is almost too perfect.
How so?
Well, the poisonous mushroom is clearly the ultimate forbidden object. It represents what theorists call the lack, the thing you desperately want, precisely because having it will destroy you.
You mean like the call of the void?
Exactly. The urge to kiss the poison is a textbook manifestation of the death drive. It's a subconscious desire for self-destruction, but it masks itself as a romantic or erotic impulse. The fact that the mushroom is crowned with earth is a blatant symbol of the grave, of mortality. He wants to kiss death.
Okay, wait. I hear what you were saying, but I have to aggressively throw a flag on the play here. I completely reject that theoretical reading.
Really? It maps perfectly onto the imagery.
Because it maps too perfectly. When you slap a label like the subconscious death drive on it, you put the poem in an academic straitjacket. You strip away the actual grounded, sweaty terror of what he's experiencing.
But the symbolism is...
Think about the author, though. He is a man with a mortgage, a tech job, kids, a marriage. He is holding his life together with spreadsheet-level discipline.
Right.
When you are living in that highly structured, pressurized state, the urge to just blow your entire life up isn't some abstract theoretical lack. It is a very real, very physical temptation.
A literal urge to escape.
Yes. Have you ever been so exhausted by your own responsibilities that the idea of just ruining everything feels weirdly relaxing? That is the mushroom. The mushroom isn't a symbol for the grave. It is the affair or the sudden resignation letter or the urge to just walk out the front door and never come back. It's the sheer toxicity of desire when you are starved for freedom.
That is a phenomenal defense of the poem's grounded reality.
Yeah.
And, if we accept your reading, it actually elevates his poetic craft even higher. Because it means the ambiguity of the mushroom is a display of precise poetic control. He deliberately doesn't name what the poisonous thing in his real life actually is.
Oh, I see.
By leaving it as a mushroom in a dark forest, he creates a container that holds all of that terrifying potential energy. If he just wrote, "I want to cheat on my wife," the poem becomes small and domestic. By writing, "I want to kiss the poison," it becomes a universal confession of the human urge to self-destruct.
Yes, the ambiguity is the whole point. And that immense struggle, the tension between acting on that destructive impulse and desperately holding yourself back, flows seamlessly into poem 22, Low-Hanging Fruits.
Which is a brilliant meditation on how our understanding of discipline changes as we age.
It's a beautifully structured narrative. He starts by pulling us back into a childhood memory in Sri Lanka. He remembers being a kid, totally wild and impulsive, sneaking into a garden to steal mangoes.
Just pure impulse.
Right. He remembers muddying the pond, making a mess, just pure, unrefined, joyful theft. Then the poem snaps back to the present day. He is watching modern teenagers walk by with their short clothes and perfectly shaped eyebrows.
The contrast is sharp.
And the speaker, now a middle-aged, responsible immigrant, looks at a literal low-hanging fruit on a tree. And he wonders why he now feels a profound sense of victory in successfully resisting the urge to pluck it.
Look at the evolution of the poet's voice here. The raw, impulsive energy of his youth, the kid stealing mangoes, has been entirely refined into this structural intelligence. He is using the childhood anecdote to actively critique the discipline he relies on to survive today.
But the critique is heartbreaking, isn't it? When you are a kid, grabbing the fruit is the victory. When you are a middle-aged adult, not grabbing the fruit is the victory.
You praise yourself for doing nothing.
Exactly. You pat yourself on the back for your restraint, but there is such a heavy melancholy to that. Have you actually won anything by resisting, or have you just successfully practiced being dead while you're still alive?
The restraint feels almost toxic in its own way. He has disciplined himself so thoroughly to be the good man, the reliable employee, the sacrificing father, that he has completely lost the wildness that used to muddy the water.
The untamed mare from earlier is long gone here.
Exactly. And you can see this in his word economy. The language here is not the raw, sprawling eruption of the erotic poems. It is measured, it is careful, it is restrained, just like the man he has forced himself to become.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the most jarring contrast in the entire collection. We move into Movement 4, covering poems 23, 24, and 25. And this is where the clash between existential freedom and the sheer alienation of domestic life becomes the focal point.
Let's start with the freedom. Poem 23, A Man Who Stopped.
The scale of this poem is vast. The speaker is out in a sprawling, quiet mountain range, and he simply stops walking. He just stands there and watches birds feeding their young. He watches flowers blooming.
Just observing.
Yeah. And in that absolute solitude, stripped of all his titles and responsibilities, he describes achieving a momentary state of Buddhahood.
This is a pure exploration of what it means to just be. So much of adult life is defined by action, what we are doing, who we are providing for. Here, meaning is achieved entirely through stillness.
A complete pause.
The fractured pieces of his identity, the immigrant, the engineer, the father, are temporarily unified because he stops trying to be anything other than an observer of the natural world.
It is expansive. It is breathing room. And then, well, Welcome to the Suburbs, poem 24, Weekends Nowadays, and poem 25, An Endless Party. The contrast hits you like a brick wall.
And this is where I have to offer a very aggressive critique of Gunasekera's craft. Because if we are truly evaluating his skill, we cannot ignore the linguistic drop-off in these two poems.
Oh, here we go. Lay it on me. What's the problem?
In poem 24, he describes his weekend routine, tending to potted plants, talking to his flowers, and feeling like a broken vessel that he has to painstakingly glue back together before Monday morning.
Okay, pretty standard.
Right. And in poem 25, he describes a social gathering. It's the exhaustion of feeding kids, faking polite smiles, watching the men talk in circles about philosophy while the wives watch TV.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
The question has to be asked.
Yeah.
Is this just bad, overwritten poetry? Does he rely too heavily on familiar, stagnant phrasing?
You mean it's cliche?
Yes. The soul-crushing weekend chores, the boring suburban BBQ, the exhausting children. These are the exact same complaints every middle-aged suburbanite makes. It skirts dangerously close to cliche. Where are the new linguistic textures? Where is the originality? To me, it feels like a massive dilution of the emotional depth he built in the earlier poems.
I hear your critique, but I am going to vigorously defend these poems. I think you are completely missing the point of why the language is mundane.
Defend that. How does stagnant language build emotional depth?
Because the diaspora experience isn't always this grand, tragic, cinematic weeping over crushed wildflowers. Sometimes displacement isn't dramatic. Sometimes it is just deeply, mind-numbingly exhausting.
Sure, but...
Let me finish. Displacement looks like standing in a backyard barbecue in Melbourne, holding a paper plate of sausages, faking a smile at a neighbor, and feeling completely hollowed out inside.
So you are arguing that the cliché is intentional?
I am arguing that the alienation is the point. He uses familiar, stagnant phrasing because his life feels familiar and stagnant. If Gunasekera only wrote about magical poisonous mushrooms and achieving Buddhahood on mountaintops, the book would feel like a fake performative art piece.
I suppose that's true.
The contrast is what proves he is a master of his own reality. Think about it. The guy achieving enlightenment on a mountain in poem 23 is the exact same guy feeling like a broken pot while watering his lawn on a Sunday in poem 24.
The oscillation between the two extremes.
Exactly. That oscillation is the truest representation of his fractured mind. The language flattens out because his soul is flattening out. He is intentionally showing us the boring, repetitive bars of the cage before he shows us the animal pacing inside it.
That is a highly compelling defense. If we view the stagnation of the language as a deliberate mimetic device, meaning the writing literally mimics the repetitive, exhausting nature of his domestic reality, then it is actually a masterful use of voice.
See.
Yeah, the poetic voice becomes performative in poem 25. He is performing the role of the bored party guest on the page, just as he performs it in real life.
Yes, he is wearing a mask. And you know what happens when you force a wild animal to wear a mask and attend polite suburban parties for too long?
The mask cracks.
It shatters. Which brings us to Movement 5, The Eruption. Poems 26 through 29. The pressure cooker cannot hold the steam anymore. In poem 26, Let the Wind Hurt, the speaker makes a direct, desperate request to his partner.
That's very raw.
He begs them to take off their calm, supportive facade and just speak harsh, hurtful words. He wants the wind to hurt him.
This is a fascinating psychological pivot. The silence and the polite tension of their relationship have become more painful than an actual fight would be.
Anything is better than the silence.
Exactly. He desires the pain of the harsh words because pain is undeniable. It proves he can still feel something real, something that hasn't been mediated and softened by the polite rules of their engineered life.
It's a plea for proof of life. And that unbearable isolation bleeds right into poem 27. This room is very quiet. I want you to picture the specific imagery he uses here because it is so loaded.
Walk us through it.
He describes iron stairs, ivy vines creeping up the walls, an antique gramophone, and the warm pink glow of a salt lamp. The partner looks around this room and sighs, calling it peaceful. But they are completely oblivious to the fact that inside the speaker's mind, violent, chaotic waves are crashing.
Let's evaluate his craft here because this is a brilliant deconstruction of the safe space. The salt lamp and the iron stairs aren't just decorative background props.
Right.
They are heavy, literal, physical anchors. Gunasekera places these grounded objects in the poem to highlight the ethereal psychological dissociation of the speaker.
The irony makes your skin crawl. The room has been perfectly engineered for peace, the soft lighting, the vintage music, but for the speaker, it is a site of absolute internal violence. It's like he has built the perfect set for a play and suddenly realizes he doesn't want to act in it anymore.
And that profound feeling of isolation projects outward in poem 28, Lit Square Boxes. He is standing on a balcony, looking out at the lit and unlit windows across the city coastline. He projects his own emptiness onto the grid of the city.
He looks at those little lit boxes and realizes that behind every single one of those windows, someone else is probably trapped in their own carefully constructed illusion of peace.
A whole city of cages.
The rigid, repetitive grid of the apartment buildings perfectly mirrors the repetitive, trapped loop of his own thoughts.
But then, poem 29, in a magical dream state. This is where the grid completely collapses. We enter what is arguably the most radical shift in imagery in the entire collection.
It is pure surrealism. We go from salt lamps and apartment balconies to a landscape made of thick, sucking mud.
Total sensory shift.
Yeah, he describes heron wings that literally freeze time, a solitary white flower blooming in a dark, forgotten corner, and an eerie, oppressive silence where birds refuse to sing. It reads like a terrifying fever dream.
Because it is the ultimate breakdown of his psychological compartments. Up until this point, the speaker has tried to keep everything in its assigned box.
The boxes from the balcony?
Right. The past goes in the memory box. The domestic duties go in the weekend box. The primal urges go in the dark forest box. Poem 29 is the moment all the boxes burst open and flood the system. The repressed anxieties, the forbidden desires, the immigrant displacement, they all melt into this terrifying swamp of the mind.
So, how does the language hold up here? You critiqued the barbecue poem for being stagnant earlier. Does he find a new gear here?
He absolutely does. The language here is incredibly original. He completely abandons the realistic, conversational diction of the domestic poems and creates entirely new, visceral linguistic textures.
Oh, interesting.
The spacing on the page, the fragmentation of the thoughts. It physically mimics the viscosity of the mud he's describing. The ambiguity here isn't vague. It's terrifying. It is the subconscious mind forcefully terraforming his physical reality.
He is totally losing his grip on the engineered life. And that complete unraveling sets the stage for Movement 6, the climax of this entire section. Poem 30, A Fairy Tale.
Calling this poem a masterpiece is not an overstatement. It represents the absolute peak of the collection's structural and emotional intelligence.
Let me walk you through this narrative because the cinematic pacing of it is just stunning. It starts with a very stark biological reality. It is the end of his wife's menstrual cycle. Outside the window, there is a heavy red full moon.
It's very vivid.
And the speaker specifically notes the smell of shampoo in his wife's damp hair. It is incredibly grounded in the physical senses.
It's not abstract romance. It is scheduled, desperate adult intimacy.
Exactly. They lock the bedroom door specifically to escape the children. They make passionate, intense love under that red moon. And afterward, they lie there, completely physical and emotionally exhausted. But then, the spell breaks.
Reality call.
A child suddenly cries out from a nightmare down the hall.
The intrusion of reality.
Instantly, the primal lovers vanish. They jump up in a panic. They literally hide the evidence of their intimacy. In a split second, they transform from untamed, passionate individuals back into mom and dad.
It's a complete 180.
They become strangers to the passion they just shared, rushing into the hallway to comfort the crying child with a fairy tale.
It is a breathtaking synthesis of everything we've discussed. If you track the evolution of the poetry, this single piece perfectly marries the raw, terrifying eroticism of poem 17 with the domestic exhaustion of poem 25.
It brings it all together.
He finally balances the primal, expressive force of lovemaking with the rigorous, suffocating technical control required by his domestic duty.
It is the ultimate whiplash of modern adulthood. You are wild beasts in the dark, and 3 seconds later, you are panicked parents frantically searching for a pacifier.
And we really have to analyze the profound dual meaning of the title, a fairy tale. On the surface, the literal level, the fairy tale, is the soothing fictional story they tell the waking child to calm them down.
Right.
It is the illusion of safety and stability they construct for their offspring.
But when you look at the deeper existential layer, the real fairy tale isn't the story they tell the kid.
No, it's not.
The fairy tale is the brief, hidden moment of passionate connection they just shared behind the locked door. That wild, uninhibited version of themselves is the actual myth. It's a fleeting fantasy they only get to enact in the dark, and the very second reality cries out from down the hall, the fantasy evaporates into thin air.
That is the tragedy at the core of the immigrant adult experience. The domestic, exhausting life is their actual reality. The free, erotic self is the fairy tale. They are entirely isolated, relying solely on each other in a foreign country, desperately creating these momentary fictions of freedom before returning to the relentless, demanding script of their daily lives.
So bringing this all together into our outro, we set out to answer a specific question today. Does this middle sequence, poems 16 through 30, dilute the emotional weight of Gunasekera's collection, or does it deepen it?
It undeniably deepens it. What this deep reading reveals is that the poet refuses to let his work stagnate in abstract yearning or simple, teary-eyed nostalgia.
No, it's much harder than that.
Exactly. Instead, he forces the poetry to transition into the heavily embodied, contradictory, and often hypocritical reality of being a middle-aged, displaced man. It is a rigorous, unflinching documentation of someone trying to balance raw, terrifying expressive force with the technical control required to keep his family afloat.
Right. And while we debated where it might falter, like the stagnant language of the party scenes, I still defend its overall brilliance, because this section is vitally important. It takes the concept of male vulnerability and strips away all the heroic, stoic armor.
It really does.
It shows us a man who is intimidated by his wife, terrified of his own desires, utterly exhausted by his responsibilities, and desperately trying to find a moment of peace between a spreadsheet and a child's nightmare.
It is a profound testament to his craft. He manages to navigate complex psychological displacement, the trauma of the diaspora, and the terrors of erotic subjectivity, all without ever losing the grounded physical reality of a man just trying to survive in a suburban Australian house.
As we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over in your own life. Look around your own house today. Think about the salt lamps and the bamboo chimes you have set up.
Your own props.
Yeah, think about the specific routines, the little structural details you rely on to signal peace, stability, and control to the outside world. Look at them really closely.
And ask yourself what they're hiding.
Are those things actually keeping you grounded? Or are they just a beautifully crafted fairy tale you tell yourself so you don't have to listen to the train whistle of the wilder, riskier things you left behind? Take that with you.